Welcome back to the PolicyViz podcast. I am your host, John Schwabish. Have you ever wondered about those charts and graphs and exhibits that members of U.S. Congress bring to the House floor or to the Senate floor? They have the big posters sitting behind them on foam board, or they have a snowball that they hold in the well of Congress. Well, if you have not checked out the Floor Charts Twitter feed that's been around for several years now, you really should, because the guy behind it, who you may not know, the single guy behind it, Bill Gray, has been collecting screenshots of members of Congress showing their charts, their graphs, their exhibits, their data visualizations, their diagrams, their photographs for the last several years. And so I'm very excited to finally be able to have Bill on the show to talk about the work that he's done to pull this great resource together, how it started, how he does it, and what interests him about these different ways of visualizing data in Congress, on the floor of the House and the Senate. So I'm going to turn it right over to our conversation. So here's my chat with Bill Gray, the author behind Floor Charts, and I hope you'll really enjoy this week's conversation on the PolicyViz podcast. Hey, Bill, we did it. We got together at last. It's been so long. Good to see you. How are you?
Hey, John, it's great to see you. Yeah, it's been basically a year where we've been punting calendars back and forth, being like, when is there not a crisis? When are we not on vacation? When is there not a flood or a leak or Lord knows what else?
Right.
So,
yep,
I
kids
know.
getting hurt, kids getting sick. Oh man.
Yep.
Well, it's great to see you because it has been a while. And excited to talk all things comms, policy, floor charts, all the good stuff.
Here for it.
So I think so. You know, I usually ask people when I do these interviews to talk a little bit about themselves. But what's interesting is when I do that is most people know, you know, Sarah Smith. They know who Sarah Smith is. They just, you know, maybe don't know their background, right? But
Yep.
interestingly, I'm not sure most people like know the guy behind Floor Charts. So this is like for many people like the introduction to the guy behind Floor Charts. So
It is.
yeah, so maybe just like who you are, where you came from, what you're doing now, and then
Sure.
we can talk about all the Floor Chart stuff in a bit. But yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So first off, Floor Charts is me. It's not 27 people. I do feel like because I never sleep, people are like, oh, the Floor Charts responded. And I was like, no, it was me. So yes. So you and I met way back when I kicked this crazy project off in 2012 when I was a night producer at C-SPAN. Just my day job was watching and producing the House and the Senate constantly. And I'll get into more of the background later, but basically that intersection of like Tumblr's high point with news's interest and then Twitter being the place. Like anybody who loved infographics, anybody who loved charts, you found yourself on an online platform,
Mm-hmm.
you know, you, me, Robert Caro, like just being like, that newspaper chart is no good. Why did we make a chart of that? Or what was Congress just doing?
Mm-hmm.
And in your own CBO background, it was like, oh, this is just cool.
Yeah.
Right. Like we found after high school, after college in the work world, you found a bunch of nerds who kind of wanted to talk about nerd things.
Right. Making pictures.
You know,
making cool pictures.
yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah.
Basically. So yeah, like I said, like 2012 was when all this started. So we have 10 plus years of fun to cover.
Mm-hmm.
But for those who don't know, like my name is Bill Gray. I live in DC. I work in policy communications, similar to you, right? Like trying to take those great ideas and shrink them enough to be digestible, right, without missing the point. You know, went from being a journalist and realizing that as much as I loved journalism, and, you know, for me, I came to DC explicitly to work for C-SPAN, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that wonderful place that everybody forgets exists sometimes
Right.
because it's always on. And that was the dream, right?
Yeah.
Like not to be the story, just to like absorb everything.
Right.
And then realized after a few years that I enjoyed talking about the work they were doing more than I enjoyed producing the work itself, right? And because for anybody who doesn't know, C-SPAN, it's not the House, Senate, and White House. It's also decades of interviews and books. And like, there's even like an award-winning miniature documentary of someone sculpting Abe Lincoln's head in life size, narrating his life as it ages. Like there's so much history that I was like, oh, I've just got to talk about this all the time.
Yeah.
Right. And, you know, Howard Mortman, who's their communications director, who is, you know, one of my idols, He and I used to talk, and he was just like, "You love doing what I do almost more than you love journalism." And I was like, "Oh, that's really smart. I should just go talk about policy and journalism and these things much more." And so over 10 years, found myself eventually where I am now, which is I'm communications director for a growing think tank called the R Street Institute. Probably everybody knows us because Shoshana Weissman of Twitter fame, senator of East Virginia, in all tongue in cheekness, is our digital communications director, and she's probably tweeting South Park memes at you to explain electricity policy today. We love pirates and Star Wars and all the nerdy things in the world. Have a director of canine policy because we like dogs. And my day job is basically taking 30, 40 scholars worth of work and being like, how do we amplify for impact this kind of what we call policy victories at the margins of like, until Texas froze over a few years ago, did you think about where your electricity came from?
Hmm.
Right? The youth vaping crisis, and how do you balance harm reduction for adults with a youth vaping crisis,
Yeah.
right? Like those kind of like deep policy issues at the state and federal level don't always make the front page, but when they do, we're standing there like, all right, who wants to talk about a solution first mindset?
Hmm.
Because our goal is not always perfect, absolute, end of day, nobody could write it better solution. It's what is feasible that's going to save lives, what is feasible that's going to improve lives, and then keep iterating during implementation, right? That kind of, policy first, politics second kind of agenda. And it's fun to be there until you realize you're talking about flood insurance during hurricanes, right? And
Yeah.
electricity during freezes, and that like every day you don't get the policy done, there's real world impact on
Yeah.
it, right? And so it bleeds, it leads, drives news. And for us, and I feel like you're part of this, and, at the Urban Institute, like policy is slow and change, but when it happens, it can be monumental, right, in
Yeah.
impact.
Right.
So yeah, we've got, I think, a 9-person communications, events, and digital team, and it's different kind of fun every day.
Great. So before we get into floor charts, I wanna
Mhm.
talk about the digital com strategy, because floor charts is a Twitter, lives in Twitter. Twitter, depending on your perspective, Twitter is dying, is dead, is whatever. But
Yep.
over the last 10 years, like the digital landscape has changed so tremendously. So I guess the question's fairly general here, I guess, but like where are you and your team thinking about digital comms now with this changing landscape?
Yeah. So, and you, for those who don't know, and you probably do, John has a book called Elevate the Debate about policy comms, and I'm just flagging it because I bought this when it came out, and I give it to a lot of my communications team because our street, especially, we are a grass tops focused audience specifically. We are not grassroots, which means we left Facebook behind a long time ago,
Yeah.
right? And so our digital lead, Shoshana Weissman, and I knew each other before I went to work at our street, and be her boss. And it was always kind of two major platforms, Twitter and LinkedIn, right? Like Twitter because the bar to entry was so low, right? Every member of Congress had a Twitter account, after hard work by Twitter to make sure that that constituent policymaker communication bridge was built. And now, we're trying. She's trying every platform under the sun because for us, especially because we also do state policy, the ability for her to just get pinged by a state person to be like, hey, we've never encountered this policy problem. Can you guys help us? Do you know somebody who can help us?
Hmm.
And I can't say enough to people that, if you had told me, when I came to DC that, a digital media director who loves to post South Park memes was going to be invited to Utah and Colorado to sit down with policy teams and say, let's talk about occupational licensing and barriers to like nurses crossing state lines to like help during a pandemic,
Yeah.
I would have been like, what? Who? Like
Hmm.
that didn't cross the mental lexicon at the time. So, I think we're on Twitter until basically the day it dies,
Yeah.
right? But for us, it's kind of following the audience, right?
Hmm.
Like because the policies, policy types, there's Post, there's Blue Sky, right? There's all of these, and we're on all of them. But like,
Hmm.
I don't know if people know Daniel Schuman, formerly of Demand Progress, now over at Popbox Foundation. Daniel Schuman has been doing lion's share of work to make sure that all of those congressional experts, all of those, staff and members, that if you're moving platform to platform, he's creating those lists on every platform for you, so that if you're that guy who really likes that CBO expert who does tweet,
Right.
you can find them again. And it's like the amount of work now to recreate the environments and the nerd circles you and I found ourselves in,
Yeah.
right? Where, and it was funny. So one of the products R Street did before I got there that still exists, Shoshana and one of our judicial experts did a database of like oral arguments, right?
Mhm.
And things like that that was searchable. And then Axios puts out a story, I think it was earlier this week, maybe last week, that was all about like how often the various people presenting the Supreme Court get interrupted.
Yeah.
And in original Twitter land, you could have tweeted at the scholars, you could have tweeted at the Axios people, and I guarantee you, Shoshana, which she did, would have found in like 24 hours someone called her and said, "You want our nerdy database? Why do you want our nerdy database?"
Yeah.
Right? And now it's like, no, I've got to go find the story, find the emails, make it sound disarming that I'm actually interested in this really nerdy thing you
Right.
did.
Right.
And like, it's just another level of like, okay, the communications bridges aren't all built the same way,
Mhm.
right? Because that's also, for me, I mean, I found my jobs because of Twitter. I mean, I met my wife because of Twitter,
Yeah.
right? Like, and the communication ecosystems where like I've worked for journalism, I've worked on the center left, I've worked on the center right because I like the policies, and like Twitter let me break those walls down for those people
Right.
to be like, yo, you work in campaign finance, you work in, harm reduction. You two should know each other because you're both building coalitions and you can learn things. And now nobody has time for Twitter because the algorithm is busted,
Yeah.
right? It's not showing you things that you want to see anymore.
Yeah.
And so it's like, kind of that, and it sounds silly, that old school, I've got to go through literally my virtual Rolodex, or if you're us, probably a stack of business cards to be like, all right, who haven't I talked to in 6 months? Because I don't see him on Twitter anymore.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and so, yeah, I'm so sad that it is basically dying. And I count myself lucky that I only get harassment when basically a member of Congress tweets something that includes me and everyone doesn't like that member for
Yeah.
that moment.
Right. For that moment.
But like LinkedIn, like, not the same thing. And how many of us, God bless LinkedIn for a lot of things, want to say yes to every single person who friends us on LinkedIn. So we'll keep trying, just like I'm sure you will. And hopefully with remote work, these virtual platforms will catch up, right, to this kind of, we're online, we can do this more if the technology and the social community catches up and we stop, kind of hating the cesspools, right? Like, and because for you and me, right, and everyone who's in, again, like Robert Caro, kind of these data visualization communities, when I started Floor Charts, there was another charts blog called I Love Charts that was basically just pictures of charts that they loved, and they had books off of this deal, right? Like they used to invite guest people to like post for a week at a time. And it's just like, I'm not going to find that again, right? Like, WordPress doesn't have that discoverability mechanism. Tumblr has gone through multiple owners, so it's like, okay, right? And it's like, what's the next thing, right? And I still love Tumblr, I'm still on it, but like when I started, I hit this really unique moment after the 2012 elections where Tumblr was trying to really encourage discoverability. And so when you signed up, they would have this grid of like 15 blogs based upon your interest that you should immediately follow. And as somebody who apparently popped one that was like news, politics, government, and like nerd, I ended up in so many of these cross sections that within like the first year, it was like 20,000 followers. And I was like, I don't even know what to do with 20,000 followers, right? When I'm just posting photos of like Chuck Grassley and a debt and deficit dragon, but they liked it, right? And like they wanted more. And now, like if I were starting this from scratch, I wouldn't know where to begin, right? Because my view of, and I love doing floor charts, it is a passion project for real, but like my view is that I am actually doing what the Library of Congress should be doing, right? Like, and we'll get into this because we talk data viz, but like archiving the photos that taxpayers pay for, sourcing these things, right? Because you can't always read the source material, right? And it's like, it's not impossible and highly resource intensive, but like so many times the point of the floor speech or the debate is actually the chart or the poster, right? And I love that C-SPAN is the one archiving all of them, but like not everyone's going to be me and watch a whole lot of C-SPAN every day,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So yeah, no, like I will follow you, John, whichever platform you choose to go to.
I'm
Which may
out.
just be a podcast,
Yeah,
right?
it'd just be the podcast. I mean, I agree with everything you just said. I mean, for me personally, I've written about this and other places. I mean, I'm not adding platforms. I'm just subtracting. I mean, and I think, kind of to your point a little bit, I think there's a generational kind of, not gap, but there's a generational change. Like, I mean, I'm sure there's good data viz stuff on TikTok, but I'm not going to do that. It's really labor intensive. I've got a job. I've got a full-time job. I've got kids. I've got other hobbies, right? Like, so, maybe Blue Sky or I don't know about Threads, but like, I don't know, maybe there's other ones, there'll be a community, but so far I'm with you. I haven't heard of any of the friends that I've made all through, like, in the data viz world, through Twitter. There's still, every once in a while there'll be some little conversation on Twitter that pops up, be like, hey, is anybody here? Like, am I just screaming into the ether? Like, and it's true. It's just kind of, yeah, it's I think it's sad for a lot of us who were able to stay out of the muck and the terribleness that can be on social media, and just were able to use it for good. But having said all that, you did a very nice lead into floor charts. So I think first question is, do you just sit in front of your TV watching C-SPAN 24 hours a day? Because you said it's just you, which I don't know. I don't know how many listeners will be how many listeners are like, wait, what? You're like, it's like, it's one dude just doing this. It's not like a team or an AI or something. Like, so what is the process like?
Yeah. So first off, anybody who wants to do this with me for free, you're more than welcome to come on board, right? And I've said it for years, but it's also like, not being a coder, not being, the most tech savvy, so to speak, right? Like, yeah, someone wants to figure out how to pull screenshots from C-SPAN with AI that accurately codes congressional bio IDs and like everything else, like come forward.
Right.
Yeah, no. So it's interesting because I categorize floor charts in pre-pandemic and then post-pandemic, right? Pre-pandemic floor charts, I started my job at R Street 2 days before the COVID-19 lockdown, and was very blessed that basically when I was at C-SPAN, I had a 4-day work week in like an overnight shift because news happened at night, which meant I had 3 days off to just go be a nerd and like watch a lot of C-SPAN off clock. When I went to a small advocate and also a journalism org in between, right? Like these were not 24/7 jobs. I wasn't at the director level at the same way. So like leave work at work, right? Like go home, if my girlfriend, now wife, was at work, right? Like had some of those free times. And also, in that high moment of Twitter, staffers were beginning to learn, if we talk to him or let him know something is coming, it will get to the blog faster, right? Or in my case, because I was a reporter first, I followed every congressional reporter under the sun. Like Niels Lesniewski is my reporter god that I still think and talk so much about, right? And so it was like, when you know that these reporters were watching the floor and they were watching C-SPAN, when there was a moment like, what's his name? Not Ken Conrad. We're going to talk about Ken Conrad later. Republican senator cuts up a credit card. I'm going to have to redo this, but I'll respeak it. Hold on. It's one of the most popular charts on my blog. Hold on. I have this thing pulled up.
I haven't heard the name Kent Conrad in a long time.
Oh, we're going to talk about Ken Conrad. Yeah, I know. No, nobody thinks about Ken Conrad, right? Like, hold on. Senator from Oklahoma, Tom Coburn. All right. So I'm going to restart in that moment. You can splice.
Okay.
I was a reporter, followed almost every congressional and White House reporter on social media that I could, right? In part for my job at C-SPAN, but also in part because, like these were the guys that like their literal job was being glued to the House and Senate movement. So if there were slow times, which is how floor charts got started, these guys were being like, hey, look at what's happening on the floor. And if I didn't have C-SPAN on, I could be like, okay, I can turn it on and like, now we're good. And one of those iconic moments was Senator Tom Coburn, Republican of Oklahoma, got up on the Senate floor and literally tore up a giant visual credit card of the nation's debt and said, I'm done with the credit card. And I say it was iconic because he did it. I was out at dinner and with my then now wife, then girlfriend, who was a staffer on the Hill at the time.
Mm.
And every single version of reaching me, my phone rang, 50 million text messages, DMs. Everybody in that day had nothing better to do than to watch a senator be like, I'm shredding a credit card. And then, probably not unironically, like 2 weeks later or so, C-SPAN Q&A, the long form interview program, led with that moment for an interview with him,
Mm.
right? And then everybody who didn't watch House and Senate but really was glued to that primetime programming was like, hey, let's remind him it happened again. And I
Yeah.
was like, oh no, I know, I'm very well aware, right? So, in some phenomenal ways, this ecosystem bubble of like government staff, including people like you, right? Like the private sector nerds, or what I call, the public interest nerds, right? Like who watch that sort of stuff and are like, okay, that's funny, and I have to do this for my job anyway. I'm going to tweet about it.
Hmm.
All kind of started intersecting into this world of like, okay, Congress, not always fun to watch, but in those moments, they were starting to realize more and more the internet basically memeified a lot of Congress,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And it just all hit that peak, right? Because the starting of floor charts was I think the day after, not the day, the week after the 2012 presidential elections. Dick Durbin went on the floor when they were talking about regulating 5-hour energy drinks. And those kinds of like, brand new to the market sort of things. And he had a 5-hour energy drink, and Niels Lesniewski and Elise Foley at Huffington Post, Niels is at roll call, were tweeting back and forth that this existed, and basically were asking each other, why is there no archive of all of these crazy things? And
Yeah.
I was at home and was watching C-SPAN because I had nothing better to do, and always had it on, and was on Twitter. And I literally just went to Tumblr and created senatecharts.tumblr.com, popped it up. I emailed Howard Mortman, our communications director of C-SPAN at the time, and was like, FYI, I'm doing this. I know it's late at night, but do you guys want this? Right? Like, does C-SPAN want to take this? And his response was like, no, like, it's your thing. Go ahead. But in the kindness of his heart, and this is where C-SPAN really shines, C-SPAN always likes to support when regular people love to use its work,
Yeah.
right? Like, not in just a like, hey, cool story method, but like book TV and when the bus used to go around, it was this kind of ecosystem of
Hmm.
C-SPAN. And so, C-SPAN enjoyed the fact that like all of a sudden congressional reporters were like, there's an entire archive based on this. So I'm going to go send this guy all the crazy charts that I've been taking screenshots of for my entire life. And, it was like, it was funny because in the first month, when the Tumblr following increased, I started getting messages being like, can you post less on Tumblr? Because my entire feed is you now. And I was like, oh, wow, I didn't even think about like basically feed dominating
Yeah.
these 20,000 followers. And blessedly, Tumblr has always had a schedule function kind of cued in, right?
Yeah.
And like all of these things. But like, in the world of floor charts, right? Like Twitter didn't exist, this would not have happened,
Hmm.
right? Like, and because I had, and not many people know this, prior to floor charts, I actually had a blog called Overheard on C-SPAN, right? That was just watching all of these archival things, right? Like Ed Rollins, way back in Reagan's days, talking about defunding the Department of Education in front of a bunch of students, right?
Yeah.
Like, or like, Alfred Kahn, Jimmy Carter's DREG guy doing like a final exit interview with C-SPAN, and just watching these things and being like, this is fascinating, but also all these policy conversations are cyclical,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I was in my 20s and being like, all this is coming around again,
Yeah. Right.
right?
Right.
And just throwing these things up on a blog and being like, this is fascinating. Or like my favorite one, there is old school Batman hawking treasury bonds in the C-SPAN library, right? And every once in a while, I'm like, yo, does anybody remember that the government did this,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Like, or um, uh, the big, for people who don't work in television, right? Like those big kind of like, you always hear about these trade association, like big junkets in like Vegas or other places, new TV technology, right? Like new digital technology, these huge things. There used to be at some of these, they would do like fake game shows with like TV
Hmm.
executives. There's one where like before CNN really got dominating, like where they all were just dunking on Ted Turner,
Mm.
right? Like all the other news executives, and you're just watching Ted Turner pre the CNN domination,
Yeah.
just in this moment where you can see him kind of like being like, oh, I'm going to get back at you all, but like I'll enjoy it. And it's all just there,
Yeah.
right? In
Right.
this library of archival video, and it's free,
Yeah.
right? And like, it was just kind of this moment where it was like there were followers on that blog, right? And it was fascinating that there were,
Hmm.
but like at the same time, like nowhere near the nexus of like funny image meets bored reporters meets congressional staff realizing, oh, I can, and this has been the policy communications, getting back to the podcast, this has been the change. Congress and staff don't need earned media anymore, right? Like,
Yeah.
that direct to constituent or direct to whatever audience you want to speak to, the internet enabled that in a larger fashion. Social media juiced it, and they all realized, oh, wait, right? Like, I all of a sudden can do something that will probably generate earned media in some fashion if I want it to. But, like, yeah, if you're flipping TV and all of a sudden you see, Chuck Grassley with a giant dragon, right? And you're like, why?
Yeah.
Like, why is
Right.
always the first thing?
Yeah.
And, and you will remember, as I do, like, Jon Stewart used to feed off this stuff,
Oh yeah.
right? Like Rachel Maddow featured this. Once I got this going, she featured all of these things,
Yeah.
right? Like television feeds off television sometimes, and so it just that and I will always give props to like Adam Sharp and the OG DC Twitter people for getting Congress engaged on Twitter and getting government engaged on Twitter. But the supercharging of like you can't not every story is going to earn some media, right? Like mixed with younger people in Congress controlling the levers of social media,
Yeah.
right? Like, the single most well, the most viral moment to me that's positive, and then there's the funny moment, which was the snowball on the Senate floor.
Yes. Remember that one?
Right.
Yep.
Exactly. But it was I think last year, Sean Casten, right, member of Congress, his digital director turned communications director, made Hot Furk Summer go viral, in and went and got earned media in every place you would imagine, from like basically like Teen Vogue to all the TV programs, because she had Sean Casten go up and do a little freestyle musicking to the notion of like FERC, this federal agency helping solve climate change. And it's this, like 20-plus-year-old staffer who just realized, I need this to be fun. I
Yeah.
need to make policy communications break through,
Yeah.
but in a way that was also, unlike someone like me who is Twitter first, was like TikTok and visual and video first,
Yeah.
right? And that kind of like evolution, because all of a sudden it went from her. Yeah, and I've met Amelia. Amelia no longer works for Sean Casten, but we got coffee, and I was just like, I have to give you huge props as a policy communicator, because you leveraged like trade publication to national publication to television,
Yeah.
an entire dialogue for weeks about Hot Furk Summer, right? And like never would have been.
Oop, hold on. Sorry, I can't. I think I muted you maybe by accident. Can you unmute yourself? Did I do it?
I think you did.
I did. Sorry, I was
I'm
trying to
back.
clear my throat and I clicked the wrong button. So
No, it's fine. Do you know when?
it was right at the end. It was fine. But I'll put the cut for this part.
All good.
Yeah. Um,
And I know I'm talking a lot, so if you want
oh,
me to
it's
give
fine.
shorter
It's
answers,
fine.
I'm
I was
happy
just
to.
trying to clear my throat for my next question. Oh, I remember what I was going to say. So it is interesting the way you describe that sort of growth, because it reminds me of SNL, Saturday Night Live, like when like Andy Samberg sort of like figured out that like YouTube was going to be the thing and started making like these smaller I mean, they went viral all of a sudden. And it's just interesting how it took so long, I guess, for members of Congress to realize they could do the same thing, right? Like they have the same power to build these visual, I don't want to say products, that's not the right word, but these visual moments, right? Where they could actually do a better job of communicating their data. Do you,
Well, and
yeah, go ahead.
well, and just briefly, like there is a House printing office, right? Like there's a government printing office,
Yeah.
right? But there is like House Creative Services, and no one. I mean, C-SPAN actually has video from inside back in, I think, I want to say late '80s, early '90s, Nowadays, no, you can't get a camera inside, right, of
Yeah.
that sort of thing. But like there is this office that members can say like, I need this printed, I need this designed, right? Or some of them can go to FedEx, Kinko's, or they're back in their district. But like this power does exist, and it's actually funny because, and I'm going to pull it up in real time here if I can find it real fast. Like I actually had somebody on Twitter again um, uh, pointing to this moment, right? Like where he G chatted me, or he tweeted at me, and this is back in 2016, that he was reading a book by David McCullough, and he was like, "Hey, did you know they had charts way back when?" I was like, "Okay, define way back when, right?" Because I've been watching a whole lot of C-SPAN,
Right.
and he was like, no, like, and I'm gonna like preview like read a bit of the passage, right? And I forget which McCullough book it is. I think it's Path Between the Seas.
Mhm.
And it's this story, right, about like Senator Marcus Alonzo Hanna delivering a speech, right? And the description of the chamber that is given is the chamber was nearly full, and all about were hung enormous maps and plans.
Mm.
One map of Central America and the Caribbean islands reached from the gallery railing to the floor,
Hmm.
showed the location of every volcano, active or extinct, right? And it's just this notion of like pre-camera, like pre-TV, they were doing this, right? Like they
Yeah.
were using visual aids to drive the point home.
Yeah.
And what basically happened, thanks to C-SPAN's cameras, is all of a sudden the lights went on, and the audience just exploded outward,
Yeah.
right? Like, and so yeah, like I've never done the math, and I will not do the math, but if you are a nerd and want to do the math, I'll let you. Like charts, the self-describing floor charts is basically charts, props, and posters, right?
Yeah.
Because it really does usually, those are the easiest categories. Charts are minimal, right?
Mhm.
Like they used to be more. Like we Kent Conrad, you and I mentioned, right? Like there is a chart that by Senator Chris Coons of Kent Conrad's rise, right? When PowerPoint became a thing,
Yeah.
and then the exponential increase of charts by Kent Conrad, right? Like I think I counted one time, he brought like 30 to the floor at once, right? And I was just like, oh, you're the budget guy. Like, but those were literally charts,
Yeah.
right? Like line graphs and all of that sort of stuff. And now, like, the last most popular thing I posted on the blog, right, was like Ted Cruz with a photo of like China spying on you from a computer,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
right? Like, memes and photographs, right, kind of took over. And even, I mean, the props are less, but those who are C-SPAN junkies, and if you're not, you'll Google this. There was a time, I forget which member it was, came to the floor and literally built a fake southern border wall, right? And like from Home Depot parts, and talked about like, is there a way we can electrify it? Right. And I was like, you literally just built a wall on the floor from Home Depot parts,
There's a
right?
there's
Like,
definitely a joke to be made here about how many miles of the southern border of the wall has actually been built there, but I'm gonna leave that alone. Yeah.
right. But it was one of those things where it's like, yes, like it is less charts and data,
Yeah.
right? And more now photograph meme, and
Hmm.
occasionally prop, right? I think it was Debbie Wattsman Schultz once brought like a bobblehead elephant to like showcase like the yes vote, right? Just back and forth,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
But like, and for those who don't know, and ask Niels Lesniewski, right? Like Niels is the dean of these sorts of things. There are rules about what you can bring to the floor, what you
Hmm.
can't bring to the floor, right? And there has been only one time in my life, and I'm trying to remember the member, where I got a phone call. It was after I had left C-SPAN, and they said, "Hey, our prop has been blocked from coming to the floor.
Oh.
Would you like us to come talk about it?" And I was like, "Yeah, I mean, I'll come to your office. It's after hours. It's fine." And if I remember the member's name, every single person will remember who this guy is, because it's the member who said the Republican plan for healthcare was for you to die quickly. And the prop that got blocked was, for those who were in DC, there was a New York newspaper cover of I think it was Abraham Lincoln covered in excrement, right? And it was this John Boehner negative speaker moment.
Mm.
And the parliamentarian had said that that visual image demeans the body,
Mm.
right? And that was one of my first entrees to, oh, this is an interesting moment that like somebody can actually stop these things from
Right.
coming to the floor. As I said, Niels knows the rules better than I do because I no longer am that nerdy of a congressional person. But like, I have not heard of many more being blocked, right? And there are plenty of things that we all see make it to the House and Senate
Yeah.
floor where we're just like, that's basically a Twitter image or a PowerPoint meme that's just been shoved onto a poster,
Right.
right? And but it's like that's now the purpose, right? Like I am a chart nerd, I am a data viz nerd, right? I am the guy that probably like you, if somebody uses one, I'm looking at where the source is
Yeah.
to be
Yeah.
like, where'd you get the data? Can I go back and find the actual report? Right. And like I'm the one who's gonna basically shit post at a member when you're in the back of the chamber, you built a really shiny chart and
Yeah.
the light is reflective, so I can't see it. Right. Like, because for those who don't know, like the lights in House and Senate cameras, they're controlled by Congress,
Yeah.
right? Like they're not controlled by private sector. So they can, and they have hundreds of camera angles they can choose from. And
Right.
I'm like, you can move that light. I know you can move that
Yeah.
light. Is there a guy I can tweet at to move that light in
Right.
real time?
Right.
Right. And so like I like it when they use actual charts and data because then I can see what's your argument. And there are only a few members, and Senator Joni Ernst is one of them, who and her staff are exceptionally good at like saying to me, in like 2 hours probably going to be on the floor, right? And I'm
Mm.
like, great, thank you for that, right? Like because even if I can't appear in real time, I can
Grab
flag
it
it,
later.
right?
Yeah.
But some of these members, and Joni Ernst's office does this every once in a while, they'll post the moment, obviously, to the constituent newsletter, right, or the website, but they'll also frequently include the source, right?
Mm.
If they're actually citing stats and figures, right, even if it's a photo, they'll include sourcing because Congress is inherently political, like right, that is
Yeah.
the job. But like for those of us who work in policy communications, we just want to know, right? Like because one, you could be a subject area we have expertise in that can solve the problem, or two, like your data may actually be wrong, which does happen sometimes.
Sure.
Like misprints happen, right? Like, there have been times where they've had the chart upside down, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I'll share with you so you can share with your readers or your listeners. Like, there's a very famous peak oil chart that has like 17 different freaking axes to it that went onto the floor. And I use it as an example of like not only bad visual design, but I hope the purpose of that chart was to showcase we don't know what we're doing.
Yeah. Right.
Right. But like I wanted to know when I saw that, I was like, what member, why, and who?
Yeah.
Right. Like, and because, again, you worked at, at CBO, like you want to put those connections together.
Sure.
Right. Like even if you're just a data viz nerd, you want to know, much less a policy nerd and a communications nerd.
Right. Right. I mean, it is interesting that there is someone who reviews or looks. I mean, I'm surprised with some of the things like just Marjorie Taylor Greene bringing on naked pictures of Hunter Biden, like made it past some filter, I guess.
Well, and again, I think there's differences between committee rule and like House and Senate floor, probably, right? Like
Yeah, right.
because committees, I think committees are institutions unto themselves, but it is still a moment where if there aren't rules, I would stand back and be like, well, why not? Right. And if the
Yeah.
rules are inherently political, such as the chair gets to decide,
Yeah.
one, I would like to know that just in almost any story that is written about those sorts of props and images, right? Like, because there are funnier moments. I think there was one where like Fred Upton and another member had made a bet and were passing like a bottle of alcohol back and forth, right? Because
Right.
they lost a bet, like a funny moment. But there was also, moments where I want to say it was Greg Walden brought in like a jar of water that had been contaminated, right? And it's like, okay, are there medical rules around bringing in a jar
Yeah.
of water that's contaminated? Like those
Right.
little things where it's like journalism can only go so deep. We know that, right? Like inches matter in regular print. But for those of us, I have met so many people in DC, both Twitter and offline, who will say like engaging with floor charts and the notion of like why was that made them want to be more engaged and
Mm.
some of them to go work inside of Congress,
Yeah.
right? And I'm like, I'm so happy for that because the original point of C-SPAN was to kind of demystify,
Yeah.
right, some of these things. And for me, like that was the point of floor charts, was to be like, this is yours. You pay for this,
Yeah.
right? Like if you pay attention, like there's a responsiveness mechanism that can be had, right? And now it feels like there's almost no way, right, to like build that relationship again between like does the staffer want to engage on Twitter? Does the staffer want the email engagement, right? Because I've tried, and I understand why most staffers aren't interested, right? But like when Substack came out, and I was like, all right, let's pop a flowchart Substack and talk about how you go from idea to chart, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and like, most staffers, you can only talk so much about the business of the office, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah,
and like
sure.
the creative process. Some of them have much more freedom, right? And some of them, by the time you get to talking about that, the narrative has shifted negative
Yeah,
on the policy issue,
yeah.
right? And so it's like, once you're back to the only way you interact with government is by the pipelines they kind of decide, right?
Right.
Phone call to your member office, email to your member office, and not all these staffers are online. Some of them really just want to talk to people. Like some of
Mm-hmm.
them don't know maybe they shouldn't talk to people because like all of us will tweet at them all the time.
Yeah.
Like there was a couple of years there where there's a guy named Yuri Beckelman. I think you know Yuri.
So.
Maybe not. Yuri worked in Congressman Mark Takano's office. He worked for the Modernization Committee. Yuri actually he brought international like chart day to Congress.
Uh,
Did an entire day. Again, Robert Caro, who I keep mentioning over and over, was there. And like his big idea for flow charts, which I'm thankful for that he did it, we reprinted like the 50 most popular crazy posters and built an art gallery inside of one of the House office buildings.
oh,
And
nice.
we were just like, come hang out, guys, right?
Yeah.
And all these staffers were like, oh, your flow charts. And I was like, yes, this is the purpose.
Yeah.
You
Right.
literally tweeted all of these memes because you want me to talk to you,
Yes.
right?
Right.
And now, like, I know how to contact Congress because I work in DC, right? But like, if and I think the most famous charts for a very long time, and there's a few members that do it like clockwork. We're always the like high school team wins,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or like so and so gets congressional like medal or
Metal. Right.
something,
Right.
and it's like those are wonderful, really like local moments, right? And it's like they get tweeted just as much as they're on the floor, but like if you remove the social media aspect of policy comms, all of a sudden it's like, did the member have time? Was the member in session to tell those people, hey, you're going to be mentioned,
Yeah.
right? Like
Right.
in this speech. And again, I'm a broken record. It goes back to like, I really would like Library of Congress, some formalized government body to realize like this is kind of like basically congressional mail, right?
Right.
Like this is a
Right.
thing.
Yeah.
This is something people would take an interest in. And I've had journalists, Derek Willis being one of them, he's no longer
Mhm.
with ProPublica, who've asked me multiple times, how formal is your archive?
Yeah.
Right? Could we basically like really implement it into basically like an actual database set that is searchable and sortable and findable?
Right.
And I'm like, yeah, it's C-SPAN screenshots, guys. Like you got 27 staff, like bring it.
Right.
But like if I don't, yeah, and this is what I mean by pre-pandemic, post-pandemic. The pandemic shift, right, of congressional going fully like remote for a while, but also all of us being glued,
Yeah.
right, indoors, like on top of basically becoming a director of 8 to 9 people, just burned through free time,
Right.
right, all of a sudden, right? And so it's like I don't get to keep up as much as I would like. I can promise you I don't miss anything, but at the same time, like Twitter decreasing in its
Mm-hmm.
algorithm like relevance, I don't get tweeted nearly as much anymore,
Yeah. Yeah. I
right?
find that too,
Like
for sure.
and so it's like, and look, I don't love social media platforms for a whole host of reasons, but for my ecosystem, it was wonderful. Again, I
Yeah.
met my wife because of Twitter,
Right.
right? Like I really can't hate on the platform
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
too much for that
Yeah.
aspect, right?
So to wrap up, what does the future look like for you in floor charts?
Yep.
Like, are we gonna get the
Yep.
coffee? I have always wanted the coffee table book. Like, are we gonna get the best of coffee table book? Like,
So let's hold on one second. So I actually have 2 coffee table books. Well, should define them more as picture books because coffee table books have a specific publishing connotation
yeah.
to my friends who work in publishing. So give me one second. Oh, do I? I may not even have the Trump one anymore. So this is actually a good story. So for those who are C-SPAN watchers or not, C-SPAN has book TV, right? One of the most popular things on the planet for those people who are older and love books. And it means C-SPAN does get a chance to kind of work to publish their own books, right? Like,
Yeah.
and you find them in like, I think the last one was like a compendium of Q&A interviews and things like that. Again, nerd like me loves these things. And so, for those who don't know, C-SPAN was founded in the brainchild of Brian Lamb. And please Google him and read all about him because he is truly an American hero. And C-SPAN, when I was there, as I said, I came to DC explicitly for C-SPAN, and they had an open door executive policy. And so I used to spend hours before work and after work just hanging around the network, right? And like
Hmm.
realizing I wanted to learn from these people. And so after I left C-SPAN, I always felt blessed that if I ran into Brian, he literally would stand in the street for half an hour with me and answer my crazy questions
Mm.
because he's a journalist. I mean, C-SPAN has a radio, right? Like radio, it has online, has 3 networks, has all of this stuff. And this guy was there for so much of it. It's like, how much is in your brain, right? Like,
Yeah.
so one day I was talking to him about books, and he was giving me as best he could the down low on the publishing industry and just
Hmm.
how impossibly hard it is to break into regular publishing, right? And I had friends, I mentioned I love charts. I had other friends who had done the 365-a-day calendars, right? Or like, the coffee table books, and he said to me, he's like, why don't you just self-publish it? Like, why don't you go
Mm.
to one of those basically like online things?
Right.
And
Just
I was like, yeah, I was like, I've got 10 to 12,000 of these freaking things archived. Like, how in the daylights am I going to find time?
yeah.
So I was talking to another friend of mine that everyone who's on Twitter probably knows, Tammy Gordon,
Hmm.
at Tammy. Tammy and I met each other because she used to be the digital lead, amongst other things, at AARP, and they were famous for this campaign called Disrupt Aging. Because AARP, you think of older people,
Yeah.
and they were like, no, Grammy and Emmy awards, let's disrupt the narrative, right? So they had tweeted one day about like, basically like how many rappers can you guess are like, part of the AARP like age range or something like that.
Wow.
And she was in a meeting, and I tweeted back at her, how many of those rappers have appeared and rapped on C-SPAN? And we got coffee later, and she was like, I was literally in a meeting, and it's like, how is this kid one-upping me, right? On my own campaign, in a meeting about a campaign. And Tammy is wonderful. We've been friends for a while. And Tammy had a friend who specialized very explicitly in helping people run successful crowdfunding campaigns.
Hmm.
Things like Kickstarter during its like
Yeah.
original heyday moment. And I reached out to her, and I was like, if I wanted to Kickstarter a coffee table book, is it possible? And she was like, oh, we can absolutely do this, right? And so
Hmm.
what ended up happening was this little crazy thing, right? That's like 28 to 30 pages. That's just the A to Z guide to
Nice.
floor charts. And it's literally an alphabetical children's style book that's not nearly written well enough. That's just like, it's like A is for alcohol because members like to use alcohol on the floor, right? B is for big charts and budget charts.
Yeah.
Really, really silly things. And I went on to Kickstarter, and I ended up raising, I think, somewhere around $10,000 and printing like hundreds of copies. And there was a Trump edition because I met some stretch goal and was psychotic enough to
Yeah.
do a
To do a
second
second
one
one.
of
Yeah.
these, right? And it was one of those moments where like I've given away a ton. Somebody recommended I give one to every congressional office, and I was like, "You got money?"
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
these things
Right. Yeah.
cost
Yeah.
a little bit to print,
Yeah.
but it was one of those moments where like again, like because of Twitter, and I will say this, because of social media, within 24 hours I had maxed the campaign already.
Wow.
But hilariously enough, none of it was journalists. None of it was the following I had primarily
Right.
built,
Right.
right? Because journalists don't buy a whole lot of books about nerdy things because they don't make a lot of money and they have
Right.
other things to do.
Right.
And congressional staff don't really need to buy these things because they work in it. But it was one where I was like, there's an audience, right? And like I launched it very particularly around Christmas, so everybody wanted a stocking stuffer, right? But
Yeah.
like, yeah, it was like I have long wanted to do another one of these, but at the same time, and you and I talked about this early, like, and this was the struggle, is like this is for those who are nerds a mile deep, inch wide sort of issue,
Yeah.
right? Like, and there are people interested in that, but how you then turn that into a product,
Yeah.
right, like is the difficulty,
Yeah.
right? And so for me, floor charts will always continue. I'm
Mm.
very sad that basically like for a long time the running goal was to have like 400 or 500 queued posts on the back. So if I had a bad week, it
Yeah,
was
it was
still
ready to
running.
roll. Yeah,
And I ran out of those like 3 years ago,
yeah,
right? And so now it's like Excel spreadsheets, right? Links, and just trying to keep up as best I can because it is impossible for one person to be the exhaustive full-time
yeah,
catalog,
yeah,
right? And like I was for about 3 years, and then I was like, nope, no more. So like the like to you and I work in policy communications, right? Like at the end of the day, like this is as robust a project as the interest in, right, basically this feature is. And I have
yeah.
never lobbied a member to be like, can you get someone like the library to handle this, right?
Right,
Like,
right.
or how's creative services, don't you have the digital files for all
Yeah,
of
right,
this? Can
right.
we just like attach it to something? But like it will go on, and I will continue to be the nerd that says this should be solvable, right?
Yeah,
Like, because when I think about, and I'm a C-SPAN nerd again for a moment. C-SPAN runs something called Student Cam, right? Like these competitions for students to submit videos based upon a question where you can earn money and come to DC and all of that. And the requirements are they use C-SPAN footage, right? And I'm like, if you had the congressional record tied to the video, tied to the
yeah.
moments of these sorts of things, it just makes that entire communications and policy thing better,
Better. Yep.
right? Like, and it makes the communicating about policy better. But it's work because, as you know, because you've seen the congressional record, it's a whole lot of text.
Yeah, yeah. That's right. That's right.
No time codes,
No,
no
nothing.
visual cues.
No.
It's like okay, and so because it's funny because in order to like if you go to floorcharts.com, most of what you'll see is like if you want to see the congressional record for that moment or that day, it's linked there. And everybody always says to me, "Well, can't you just like only do that speech in the congressional record?" And I was like, "If the congressional record was digital first,
Yeah.
I could do a whole lot
You
of
do
things
a
for
whole
you
lot of things.
guys.
Yeah.
I don't have the time to do that
Right.
anymore, right?" Like, and so it's an awesome project. I'm so glad to be talking to you about this stuff, right? But like, yeah, because like I still continue to believe the average reader, listener, viewer is more interested in policy than DC believes they are, right? And like, my plug at the end of the day is the only plug I really have because I love Floor Trust. I love your work, and you know this. We kicked a podcast at our street this year that was called Red Tape because we are a center right pro limited effective government, right? It
Hmm.
needs to be very effective, but it doesn't need to be as monolithic with just bureaucratic red tape. And the entire point of the podcast was we sat down and we were rapping, and it was like, why can't I have solar panels on my house if I want?
Hmm.
Right? Like, why is someone trying to take away TikTok from me? Like, why are EVs only just now here?
Hmm.
Right? And it was this dialogue where it was like, break everything down to like basically if you had to just talk about it every day to somebody like in an Uber or on a train.
Yeah.
And it was like, no, we found that the audiences really just wanted to know in simple terms,
Right.
right? Like about why government, why not government, why reg, why not reg. And as I think we all know, because I'm being repetitive, you know this, when you talk one to one with people, right? Like it's a much more realistic, engaging dialogue than just, hey, that party's bad, that law is evil, this person's
Yeah.
terrible. Like, and because I always say, like, I'm interested in government. I'm not interested in politicians,
Hmm.
right? Like they are interesting people. I read their books, I watch their speeches, but they are functions of government,
Yeah.
right? Like, and for me, like the word of the day for anybody who ever knows me is always P for precedent, right? Like you watch what government does because when it sets precedent, it has ramifications, right? And so for something like floor charts, like it's going to sound crazy, but like they will try to meme one up each other constantly, right? Like Mike Lee bringing out Star Wars Tauntaun photos, or Aquaman on a seahorse, right? Like Sean Caston going deep on like raps. Like they try to outdo each other,
Yeah.
right? Like, and it's actually funny because there was, and then we will wrap this up. There was one moment, and it was a very funny moment. It was after the 2020 elections, as when everybody remembers Congress really started having vigorous debate about how do we prevent another 1/6, but also like how do you ensure that if you have another pandemic with an election in the middle, you enable accurate, right, robust, secure, reliable elections.
Yeah.
And John Cornyn got up with a chart that was like 94% say 2020 elections were like the easiest and or safest. And he was using it to make a point. And then another Democratic member of the Senate came over, took the chart away from him, and was like, "Yeah, I want to point out that this number's big, right? Like that if this is your point, can we pass a law that makes this the point?"
Right.
And it was the first time I'd ever seen that actually pass hands,
Oh,
right? And I was like, "This is hilarious. This very funny moment for those who are interested in policy. Like, where did the number come from? How do I get in touch with the member office? How do I take this moment and make it more real in like a solutions mindset?" Like that at the end of the day is the purpose of things like charts and props in Congress, right? It's
yeah.
not just the viral moments. Like
No,
they
right.
want you to pay attention,
Right.
right? And again, and I'm a broken record, like you pay for this,
Yeah. This is
right?
ours.
Like whether it's $10, $50, or $100, you're paying for
Yeah.
it, and they often don't want to remind you of that,
Yeah.
right? But just like you pay for government, so watch C-SPAN, so to speak, right? Like you pay for government, read the CBO reports, look at the props, and tell them what you think, but kind of be respectful about it,
Yeah.
right? But yeah, no, John, like again, I recommend for DC, and you're not going to update it soon because you have a life. Anybody who hasn't picked up Elevate the Debate to really understand policy and communications in the intersection, this is why John and I know each other.
Yeah.
This was the original conversation, right?
Right. And then I would say to folks who are listening, if you want to help Bill, sounds like he could use some help. So if you want to help collect, organize, catalog, how many images do you have? Do you have a sense?
12,000 on the back end at this
12,000 on the back end. So if you want to help organize 12,000 images into some sort of usable database, I'm sure that would be great. Bill, thanks so much for coming on the show. It's great to see you. Great
Always
to
good to see you,
chat.
John.
I look forward to just watching more in floor charts.
Have a great weekend. Go Bills, right?
That's right. All right. Thanks, buddy. It's good to see you.
No problem. Talk to you later.
Bye. And thanks to everyone for tuning in to this week's episode of the show. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. I hope you'll check out Ideas on Stage and check out some of their resources and materials. And of course, on the PolicyViz site, I have an entire section dedicated to presentations under the Better Presentations tab on the show, on the website. You can check out different resources, downloads, PowerPoint templates, worksheets, all the stuff that you'll need to improve how you present your information, your data, and your analysis. So until next time, this has been the PolicyViz podcast. Thanks so much for listening.